I want to thank Christopher and the rest of the organizers, the sponsors, everyone who put CouchCon together. It's been a really cool event so far, and I'm really excited for the afternoon. And thank you for taking the time to come see me talk. Some of the morning talks had some really cool audience participation, which was really fun. My talk doesn't really have specific audience participation, but I will be trying to keep an eye on the, feel free to say hi. I'll try to keep an eye on the comments and we can chat through it if possible. So we'll see what happens. It's my first time doing a virtual talk, and I'm really excited about it. And thank you so much for all of you for inviting me right into your own homes. It's very cozy. I really love what you did with the place. Thank you so much. So I just want to introduce myself real fast. My name is Jameson Hampton. My friends call me Jamie. I'm from, and I am right now broadcasting from Buffalo, New York, the home of bad sports. I make that joke at the beginning of all my talks, but right now, since there are no sports, I would say that I guess we're all tied. But it is snowing here, so we're losing in that way. I'm representing Greater Than Code. That's the podcast that I'm on. It's a tech podcast, if you haven't heard of it. We talk about tech stuff, but we kind of do it through the lens of the people who made it and their journey that got them to the point where they are in their career, because we think that that's a really important part. I also just literally yesterday started a new podcast called Stationary and Sassy, which is a Fast and Furious fan podcast. Maybe less relevant to your interest than a tech podcast, but maybe not. I don't know your life. I'm not actually representing a company right now. I'm in between jobs. So if you are hiring, job hunting during the pandemic is not that fun, please reach out to me. You can find me on Twitter at Jamie Bash. Feel free to friend me, talk to me, post about my talk, send me memes, send me pictures of your cats. The only thing that I ask is that I do use they, them pronouns. So if you're going to talk about me publicly, please keep that in mind. I'm just going to fix this to make sure I have it on my phone. Okay, cool. This way I can see your comments. But now I'm going to talk about remote work. This is a talk about remote work. It's a talk that I actually wrote before. I am going to kind of touch on what's going on right now, but I've been working on this talk since before everything that's going on happened. So this is a chart from the Stack Overflow Developer Survey in 2019, where they asked about how often devs work remotely. So as you can see, at least in 2019, a lot of people didn't at all. But 12% of people were full-time remote. So that's a pretty sizable chunk of the industry. And other people work remote part of the time. I think I will be interested in seeing the 2020 survey because I think it's going to be a lot different in interesting ways. But I will talk about that more later. In addition to this, in the 2017 Stack Overflow Developer Survey, they also asked a question about what were your top priorities when you're looking for a new job? And 53% of people said that remote options were one of their top priorities. So it is kind of a big thing that's important in our industry. Personally, I've been working in tech for about 7 years, and I've been remote for the whole time, 80 to 100% remote. And when I tell people that, I usually have a conversation that goes a little bit like this. And I know that from working with remote people that they've also had this conversation a lot. It's pretty common. And I also know that these kind of responses annoy a lot of people that are full-time remote. And I get that because sometimes people who have never worked remote have a tendency to think that it's like a walk in the park, you're not really working. And that's not the case at all. It's still a job. You still have to do the same amount of work. In fact, I feel guiltier when I'm kind of taking breaks or whatever when I'm at home than when I am in an office, because in an office, you kind of have water cooler chat with your coworkers. It happens naturally, and you don't get that at home. So it can be kind of isolating not having this kind of chat. So this is part of a comic from the Oatmeal about remote work that a lot of it resonated with me, but particularly this resonated with me a lot as someone who's worked remote for long stretches of time. But ultimately, when I have these conversations, my responses are more like this. Because I love working remote. It really, really works for me, and it's been a huge help for me in my career. It helps me do my best work. And so I want to talk about why that is. I think the last one on this slide is a little bit of a monkey's paw because now a lot of people have an opportunity to do remote work, but I still think it's really important to talk about why it works so well for me and for a lot of other people. So there's a lot of benefits about remote work. I'm going to talk about them at first, like a little bit in general. These are kind of benefits you'll see on any list of people, any list that people make about like why remote work is cool. That kind of apply to anybody. Flexibility is like a huge, huge thing. You know, maybe you want to start your day a little bit earlier or later. That's usually fine with remote companies. Maybe you have something you have to do at a specific time of day, like you have to pick up your kids from daycare at a specific time. It can be really good for that. And also there's no commute, which is also kind of a flexibility thing. But this is a big one for a lot of people. It's a big one for me. In Buffalo, we don't really have public transportation very well. And we also have bad weather, apparently all the way into May because it's snowing right now. But I don't have to dig out my car in the winter, so that's a big plus for me. And again, kind of on the flexibility theme, you have the freedom to work from anywhere. I love to travel. Obviously haven't been doing a lot of it lately, but normally I do a lot of traveling, a lot of conferences, visiting people. And if I'm visiting like my family in Texas or my friends in Chicago, I don't have to take time off necessarily. I can work remote from wherever I am during the day and then spend time with my friends and family in the evening. And so it gives you a lot of more flexibility about that kind of travel, which is really cool for me and for a lot of people. This one, your mileage may vary a little bit with. Some people find it really difficult to work from home because they will get distracted by things around the house, like the dishes, the laundry, the dog. This one's kind of out the window right now, which I'm also going to talk about more later. But in general, a lot of people, including myself, find that they have better productivity at home because you're not getting interrupted by coworkers all the time. You can often have longer stretches of time where you're just heads down coding, and that can be really great for people. Like, I know it's hard to find heads down coding time sometimes. In addition, the comfort of working from a space that you're already comfortable in is like real. It can't be understated. You can have your office however you want. You get up, it's there. It's really convenient and it's really comfortable. But again, that list was in general. And I'm going to kind of talk about some specific demographics and specific reasons that remote work works for some people. So I read a whole bunch of definitions for the word benefits. I liked this one. A lot of them also mentioned like advantageous or advantage was a word that came up in a lot of them. But I think the word benefits is really interesting because it can kind of mean a couple of different things. Because some benefits are nice to have. They're convenient, they're great. They make your life a little bit better than it might have been otherwise. But other benefits are things that you need. When we talk about like our benefits at work, they make it possible to do something that you might not have been able to do otherwise. And there are people for whom remote work is more than just a little bit of extra convenience. It's something they need to make it possible to do something that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So I think it's cool to think about what benefits you want to offer people, but I think it's maybe more important to think about what problems or barriers you want to help people solve. And I like to think about the word benefits kind of in that context. As you may have seen from the title, this is also kind of a talk about diversity in our industry. So I'm going to talk a lot about why remote work can help diversity at your company. But first, like, why do you want that? Hopefully you already do. A big reason that you might want a diverse team is just because it's the right thing to do. It's great to have lots of different people on your team. It's great to have give people a fair shot and not discriminate against people. It's the right thing to do. Additionally, it also makes your team stronger for a couple of different reasons. First of all, having different perspectives represented on your team is going to make you better at anticipating problems and having empathy. I do a whole talk about user empathy. I can link it later. But it's kind of about the fact that we're not really great at anticipating the needs of people who have a different set of needs than us. And there are things that you can do to get better at that. But also just having a lot of people on your team with different needs kind of spreads that out and lets different people be thinking about it from different angles. An example I like to use with this is I read about a team that was working on like those automatic hand dryers that they have in bathrooms when those were kind of new. And you like put your hand under and it like turns on automatically. So they had done this whole product and they had put it out and it was in bathrooms. They tested it. And then they found out once it was like in the wild that it didn't really work effectively for people who have black skin. And so that was embarrassing because they should have thought of that and they should have tested for it. But I think the reason that it was particularly embarrassing is that it made it very transparent that they did not have any black people on their team. Because if they had any black people on their team working on it and testing it with them, this would have come up and it didn't come up. So that's really important. Also, you're just going to land talented people. In general, the tech industry has kind of a diversity problem. A lot of people are just hiring people for culture fit, people that already look like them. So not only is their team going to not have these better perspectives and they're going to put out this embarrassing hand dryer, but also they're like not getting the best candidates because they're only looking at a narrow section of the population. And like those candidates are there and you can hire them and they'll be great on your team and it benefits everybody. I also want to touch real quick on diversity versus inclusion, which are like two kind of separate things. This is pretty well trod area and when we're talking about diversity in tech, but I do think it's important. Diversity is about having a team that doesn't all look the same. You've got different kinds of people represented. But inclusion goes a step farther than that, and it's about making those people feel comfortable and integrated. This graphic I think is helpful. I don't like the way that the arrows go. I think the arrows should maybe point the other way. But as you can see on the left, you kind of have diversity. You've got different kinds of people. But on the right, it's more like inclusion because those people are kind of integrated into one team. And so if you have diversity without inclusion, it alienates the underrepresented people that are on your team. It makes people feel like, you would rather have an About Us page on your website that like brags about having different kinds of people. You care about that more than you care about like actually supporting your employees. And eventually that's going to lead to less diversity because, underrepresented people aren't going to want to stay at your company. But on the other hand, inclusion fuels diversity because then you are going to retain those people. And in fact, you're going to attract more diverse candidates because underrepresented people in tech talk to each other and find out what companies are good at this and then go and like specifically try to work at those companies. That's something that I'm going through right now and it's a very real thing. So as I said, I want to talk about some specific demographics that benefit, I think, from remote work in kind of unique ways. So the first one I'm going to talk about is people who have chronic illness or disability. And I do want to say that there are tons and tons and tons of different kinds of illness and disability that have different symptoms and different challenges and different needs. So this is kind of general. But in addition to that, I do want to disclose that personally, I have pretty severe anxiety disorder. And so that's a big part of the reason why working at home is so important for me. And I'm going to talk about that, that context, because it's improved my life a lot and it's kind of, what I know. This is a kind of personal talk, so I'm a little nervous, but it'll be good. So first of all, accessibility concerns. Again, lots of different disabilities have different accessibility concerns, but that's actually kind of the whole point. The best place probably that someone is going to have the best accessibility is maybe at their own house where they've already set things up and they have total control over their environment, rather than in an office building where accessibility might be a problem. And kind of on that notion, people could have difficulties getting to work, getting out of the house or getting out of bed in the morning. Before I was fully remote, I used to miss a ton of work because there are days when I feel bad in the morning. It feels too hard to get out of bed, but I could still work. In fact, sometimes in those situations, working is great for me because it kind of provides a distraction from what I'm going through otherwise. So being able to do that instead of taking sick time has been really good. And flexibility is kind of goes in with that too. Flexibility is great for everyone, but some people are going to have a more tangible need for it. You know, if I have a panic attack early in the morning, maybe I need to go back to sleep for a couple of hours before I'm useful at anything. And again, I used to have to take a whole sick day because I was going to be an hour and a half or 2 hours late. But now that I'm working remote, I often can just sleep in, get to work a little bit later when I'm feeling a little bit better, work a little bit later into the evening, and there's a whole day of productivity that I didn't lose. Also, people with chronic illness often have frequent doctor's appointments. Those also require more flexibility than other people might need. When I say energy conservation, there's a metaphor I really like to use called spoon theory. I actually do a whole talk about spoon theory also. I can also link it. But essentially, it's getting at this idea that we all have a finite amount of energy every day. And the spoons are like the metaphorical energy unit that you're spending when you do things. So, you know, if you spend all your spoons, if you spend all your energy, then it's gone and you don't have the energy to do anything else in the day. So that's true, I think, of everybody. But this is like a big thing that people talk about in the chronic illness communities, because people with illness and disability have to ration their energy in a way that other people don't. And so if you're rationing your energy, you can save a lot by like not having to get ready in the morning, not having to commute. You can be like fresher at the beginning of the day and have more energy to do other things. Also, people just want to be private about their health issues naturally. If a lot of people who struggle with this kind of thing have good days and bad days. And maybe like you don't want people to see you on your bad days. And maybe if you're working remote, that just means not turning on your video for one day. So that preserves a lot of privacy for people. You know, if I have a panic attack at home, it like sucks and it's hard. But if I have a panic attack like at an office, it's awful and it's really embarrassing and hard to come back from. So it's like a very different situation to be in. I kind of have already gotten the idea of like there are underrepresented people in our industry. And I think that in a lot of ways, remote work can be a more comfortable experience for us too. Energy conservation is a thing again. Normally that metaphor is used, it was coined specifically for people with chronic illness, but I've used it for underrepresented groups before because I think there's a similar energy cost of it takes more energy to do things in an office. Here are a couple of the reasons why. Code switching. So we talk a lot about bringing your whole self to work. I think that's really nice. I don't think that's a bad thing to talk about, but also I don't think anyone really does that. Because everybody talks different to their friends than they do to their coworkers. And if you're not part of the majority in group, that's like even more true. Like that might mean that the slang that you use with your friends that are from the same ethnic group as you is different from other people. For me, it means that the way I talk about my life in a group where everyone is queer is very different from when they're not. So there's an energy cost associated with kind of deciding when to code switch and making those kind of calculations. Microaggressions is also a huge topic. But what I mean by that is kind of like small, indirect, maybe unintentional discriminations against minority groups. And they totally happen in the office. This might be something like someone telling off-color jokes that make you uncomfortable, making assumptions about people. It's really tough for me when people like assume I'm straight and I have to like come out to them about it. Another one for me is like getting misgendered is really big. And even if people are, you know, trying to avoid microaggressions, they're just a thing that happens. And even though they're small, they add up and they take up energy. Related to this is this idea of like fitting in or feeling like an outsider. Someone once told me about a story about their kind of career path. He worked in a series of jobs where he was the only Latino in the office and felt like his coworkers just didn't really understand him and his background. And then he got a fully remote job that was kind of async, and there were people all over the country, all over the world on the team, all remote. And he said that it was like the first time that at a job that he didn't feel like he stuck out because everyone was so different that there wasn't really an in-group and a minority group in that way. And I thought that was a really cool story, actually. Additionally, resources can be an issue. It can be really expensive to work in like a white collar industry. Think about someone who comes from like an underprivileged background. Maybe they just did their first coding boot camp and they're looking for their first tech job. Well, maybe they don't have like a wardrobe for a business casual office and they can't afford to put one together yet. Maybe their coworkers want to go out to lunch together and they like can't afford to go spend money on lunch at the lunch place. Maybe even transportation getting to and from work can be a barrier. And that kind of leads me into location-based diversity, which I think is really important. And I think it doesn't get talked about enough, but this idea that like people who come from different places, who live in different places, who have different backgrounds, they have those different perspectives that are going to make your team stronger. Not everyone has the resources to live in major urban areas. And when we talk about tech, a lot of jobs are in New York and the Bay Area, the two most expensive places to live in the whole country. So like not everyone can afford it. Maybe some people have family obligations. They have family members to take care of or people they can't be too far away from. And they feel like they can't move away to like a different metro area. That's probably more common in people from different backgrounds because different cultures kind of value that differently. Maybe you have people with visa issues. I think it's really cool to have people actively working on your team from other countries. It gives you those perspectives. It kind of spreads out your time if you need coverage, but it can be hard to like for them to move to the US and work. And it could be better to like kind of work from where they are. Again, about coverage is a big one. And again, these are factors that could affect probably anybody, but they kind of disproportionately affect underrepresented folks because of people who have underprivileged backgrounds, people who have different cultures, live in different places. This is something that like comes up with different demographics, I guess. So I talked about some general stuff, but I also kind of want to talk specifically, focus specifically on the trans community for a little bit. And the reasons I want to do that is one, I'm trans, and I think it's important to talk about what you know, and also what's important to you. And this is really important to me. The number of trans people working in tech is growing a lot. And that means that the likelihood that you have a trans coworker or that you will have a trans coworker is growing. And I think it's really important to understand that perspective so that it will help you work with people more effectively. Also, I think the reason that the number of trans people is growing is because remote work is possible in tech and it's not possible in all jobs. And I think there are unique reasons why trans folks can want remote jobs. And so what are those reasons? That's what I'm going to talk about. Transitioning is just really hard in general. It's a really huge change in one's life. It's a change for the better, but any kind of big change comes with challenges. And additionally, you also have to worry about like if people are gonna like accept or respect you when you're transitioning, which is uniquely difficult. And even if you're in a good situation at your office where you have a bunch of people who want to be respectful, which isn't always the case, unfortunately, but even when it is the case, there are still unique challenges. Lots of trans people have big baggage about their wardrobe. It can make it really difficult to navigate like a business casual world. Also, a lot of people, when they first come out, essentially have to replace most of their wardrobe kind of all at once, which is really tough. It's usually a thing that happens over time. And so newly out trans people often don't have a ton of like appropriate clothes to wear to work. And that can be difficult and expensive and stressful. There's also big baggage with like what bathroom to use. I cannot express to you how stressful this is as a trans person. I don't have enough time to do so. It would take an hour, but you might have somewhat of an idea if you've seen like, the bathroom bills and things like this in the news. This is like kind of a hot topic. I'm going to link at the end also to another talk that's kind of specifically about some of these, like having trans coworkers. That's really, really good. That does cover this in kind of more detail. The existential horror of being perceived in my physical form. As if feeling super self-conscious about your appearance isn't bad enough, which a lot of trans people experience, transitioning also often comes with kind of awkward teenage phases, where your appearance is changing and it's uncomfortable. This is especially true for people who are doing like hormone therapy, which not everybody does, but a lot of people do. And so it can be a relief to just be like, I feel super bad about how I look today. I'm going to keep my video off. It also, again, helps preserve privacy. I've been very open about my transition, but it's very natural to want privacy during it. And this helps a lot with that, to not have to go in every single day and people like observe how you're changing over time. When you first come out, people have to learn your new name and pronouns. And even well-meaning coworkers will sometimes mess this up because it's really hard. But I find it much easier to practice and get good at it when you're using like a text-based mode of communication, because it gives you a little bit more time to think about what you're going to say and maybe correct yourself before you just blurt something out. At my last company, everyone was really respectful of me. On Slack, everybody always got my pronouns right. But then sometimes when we like did in-person company meetups, people would get it wrong a lot. And they were trying, but it was just harder for them in person. And so that was really tough for me because they were doing their best, but it made it really hard for me to be comfortable at like in-person gatherings. Also, it can be really anxiety inducing to like correct people. And I find that easier to do where you can just kind of like subtly say something over text rather than having to like speak up in person or on a call and like interrupt. So that's been really helpful for me too. Also, not all trans people have surgery, but many do. I did. It was almost 2 years ago I had my surgery, and I was really worried about like having enough sick time to take off of work. But I ended up not having to take a ton of time off of work because I hit a point where like my brain was feeling fine, but I couldn't really get out of bed and walk around. And so I was working like right from bed, which is really great. And people didn't have to like look at me while I was recovering, which was also a relief. So I talked a lot about the benefits of remote work, but there are cons of remote work too. There are already a lot of talks and articles that kind of go into the challenges of remote work, tips for working effectively. Particularly now, there's been a huge rash of them. The market is flooded with them, which is really nice actually, because people who are already good at remote work like want to help people that are suddenly new to remote work, which I think is like great in our community. But I also think that the phrase already good at remote work, which I just used, is kind of the key that I want to get into, which is that there's kind of a remote mindset. It's not always easy. It takes work to be remote. And it doesn't always come natural to everyone. It's a skill that you can practice and get better at over time. And also, a healthier remote environment isn't something that just happens. It's something that you have to decide that you want and take intentional steps to make a healthy remote environment. Again, there's lots of kind of coverage of this in general, but I'm going to talk about some specific things that I find are relevant to some of the stuff I've already been talking about. Text-based communication is a big thing. Not all communication is over text if you're working remote, but a lot of it is. So this slide is going to have a bunch of tips that I think will be helpful for everyone, but are particularly helpful for me as someone who struggles with mental illness specifically. So here's some good things about text-based communication. The messages are just there. You can go back and read them again. They'll exist there in Slack or wherever. One of my anxiety symptoms is memory lapse. If I'm feeling really anxious, I'll just forget things. And so it's really helpful for me to be able to go back, see exactly what someone said and like the context in which they said it. It also kind of gives you more time to respond to people. Being put on the spot with questions can be anxiety inducing also. Async culture helps with that. But even in a situation where someone texts you and needs something kind of like right away, you still have a little bit more time to think about how you want to word it. And that's important to me. But text-based communication is also has a lot of challenges. First of all, tone is really, really hard to convey. And my anxiety makes me worry like a lot about people's tone. I like overanalyze the words people use. It's not great. So you have to be really explicit about your expectations. And I think over communication is better than under communication in this instance. Like, tell me explicitly if your request is urgent or non-urgent, especially if you're sending it after hours. Um, I think clarifying tone can feel like awkward to people, but it really helps. And I don't think it's silly. It sounds a little bit silly, but I think emojis also really help. I love emojis. They really can put a lot of tone into text. I'm going to tell a story. My old company had a Slack emoji that we made and like custom uploaded that said WIC, which is an acronym actually. I'm going to tell a story about my dad, who I'm pretty sure is watching right now. So, hi, Dad. But he used to text me all the time when I was younger, like, call me. And I would freak out. I'd be like, why? What happened? What's wrong? Am I in trouble? What's going on? And then I would call him and he would like tell me like a funny story that happened. And so we came up with this like WIC, when you can, acronym that we used specifically to convey like, I want to tell you something, I want to talk to you, but it's not that important and it's not bad. And we started using that at my old job for the same context. And it was like really helpful actually. And that's kind of about giving as much context as you can for messages. Like, again, if someone calls me without telling me at work or like ask me to, can you hop on a call right now? There's 1,000 ways that I'm overthinking that. What is it urgent? What happened? What's broken? Am I in trouble? Like, what's going on? But if someone just takes like a few more seconds to say, hey, can you hop on a call right now? It's time sensitive, but it's not an emergency. It's about this project that you're working on. That might take them 10 or 15 seconds more to give me the message, but it saves a lot of anxiety for me. So I think the first step to kind of being a good advocate for these kind of things, especially in a remote situation, is like listening to people and getting different perspectives on it. So you're kind of all doing that right now, listening to me. Thank you. That's the first step. But I want to talk about kind of some actionable tips for remote, particularly for like a distributed team. You'll hear a lot of the phrase remote first culture. Not always can you be in a situation where every single person is remote, but sometimes when some people are remote and others aren't, they're like in an office, then the remote people are missing out on conversations that are happening in person. That might mean socially, they're just not getting as much social time, not getting to know as many people as well. That's a little bit inevitable, but it can cause people to get overlooked for opportunities, which, like I say on the slide, it's something that underrepresented people already struggle with a lot. Also, sometimes people will get left out of conversations that are directly related to something they're working on. Like if two people just pass in the hall, like, hey, let's talk about this project. It can make it really hard for another person or remote person that's working on that project too to not have the context of all those conversations. So again, this is like hard for underrepresented people already, and remote work when it's done wrong can like make it worse really actively. But there are things that you can kind of just like subtly do, even if you're not like a manager and making decisions about if you're a remote first culture. If you're in one of those conversations and someone and you know that there's a remote person that's also on this project, just say something like, hey, you know, Jamie works on this project too. They're not here. We should probably include them in this. Can we talk about this later when we can get everybody on? This one's a huge pet peeve for me, but I feel like it must make other people uncomfortable too. But I hate being on a video call where there's like a bunch of people in person on one video and then like a couple of remote people calling in. It's impossible to keep up with that conversation. There's lag, there's weird noise coming from the room. It's just, I can't understand what people are saying and I can't chime in. It makes me feel so left out. It makes me feel more left out than if I just didn't get invited to a meeting. It's so frustrating. So at my old company, I complained about this. We did have a bunch of people who were in our office in New York City. And what we ended up doing is like when we had a big call with lots of people, we made everyone get on separate laptops. So even though there were 15 people in the office and then 10 people remote, those 15 people in the office would all get their laptop out, put their headphones on and like call in. And then you get like the Zoom call where everybody's face is there and it feels much more like a remote call and everyone's kind of on a level playing field. Again, microaggressions, cannot cover all of them, huge category. But like in general, a really good way to support underrepresented folks in an office is to get better at identifying microaggressions so that you can A, not do them yourself, and B, notice when other people are doing them and kind of say something about it. So I'm going to talk about just a couple that kind of relate to the specific stuff I've been talking about. Don't comment on people's appearance on video calls. I'm not talking about like, I like your new haircut, that's fine. But maybe someone is looking under the weather, maybe they look really tired, maybe they have some bad acne, maybe they're wearing pajamas. There's no reason to comment on any of those things. It's only going to make people uncomfortable. A lot of places push for everyone having their video on during remote calls. I do think that that's like, there's value in that. I think it helps people get to know each other better, like a more natural rapport between your team, I guess. But I also think that if someone like occasionally wants or needs to keep their video off, you should just let them do that and don't comment on it. No one needs their video on every single meeting, every single day to get that kind of rapport. And there's probably a reason if they want to turn it off every once in a while. Also, correct name and correct pronouns are not something that you should only be doing when you're with the person that you're talking about. Especially like I said, I was in a situation where I was remote and I had coworkers in the office, and I was constantly stressed out about like, well, are they misgendering me in the office when I'm not there? This is a thing that people worry about for real. But don't let that happen. It's disrespectful. And it's also, you're not getting good practice to get it right when you are with that person, and then they are going to know. This one comes with a little bit of a caveat. You should talk to your coworker about kind of what they feel comfortable with this. My experience is a lot of trans folks will be really appreciative for folks that take this on, but everyone has different comfort levels with this. So don't assume when you can ask. Like I said, I started writing this talk before kind of the COVID-19 situation that we're in happened, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about it because a lot of people are new to working from home. Welcome. As I said, a lot of remote people want to try and support people that are new to it. But I do think there's a couple of, well, probably more than a couple, but a couple that I'm going to talk about, like really big ticket remote concepts that are coming up. So I think it's really kind of a revolution in some ways that we have a bunch of people working from home for the first time. There have been people like me who have been advocating for a long time, like these are the reasons why I need to work remote. These are the reasons why it's helpful for me. And some people have been told like, oh, well, we can't at our company. We see why it would be helpful for you, but we can't. Well, it turns out it's hard, but we can, and we are. So I think in some ways that's a bit of a Pandora's box situation. I think it's going to be really hard to put that back in the box now that folks that have been wanting these kind of accommodations are getting them. When this is done and we go back to quote unquote normal, I have no idea what that means, but I think it's going to be really hard to tell those folks like, well, we can't again, so come back to the office. On the other hand, you have people that are working from home for the first time and they're like, what? This sucks. Well, guess what? Of course it sucks, because suddenly having to work remote forcibly in the middle of COVID-19 is not a healthy remote environment, and is not what working remote is normally like. We're not normally under the stress of living in the middle of a global pandemic. We're not normally stuck inside our houses all the time, potentially with your spouse who also can't go to work, or your kids who can't go to school, all the distractions that come along with that. And I'm really worried that people will assume this is what remote work feels like and be like, well, I tried working remote and I hated it. Yes, we're all struggling with it right now. But I really want to urge people to kind of realize that it's a different situation and not like judge the concept of remote work on how hard it is right at this exact moment. Well, what about the future? I think it's really hard to even speculate about the future right now. Like, gosh darn it, we just don't know what the world is going to be like in a few months, which is really scary. But I also think that while we're in a tough situation right now, if we're thoughtful about it, at least in the context of remote work, that potentially we can change the landscape in ways that are exciting and will help people long term. If we integrate remote work into our lives as like a standard thing and we think about it in the right way. And I hope, for me at least, I'm hoping that that could be a bit of a silver lining with what's going on. Maybe this will help people going forward into the future. I have a few talks. I will link these in Slack in the track 2 discussion. The spoon theory talk that I did, I mentioned. This is a talk from RailsConf by Maria Zashin about going remote. Again, there's a lot of talks about that. I think this is a good one. Trans Eye for the Cis Ally. My friend Julian Fitzpatrick did this talk. I mentioned it also. Good watching. And thank you so much.